44 days have passed since a ceasefire was called in Gaza. 44 days, which I have to be honest and say I found immensely painful. As we all know, it's not a ceasefire in any meaningful sense. At best, we can call it a de-escalation of bombing, in which war, occupation, killing and degradation continue. In the past 44 days, over 336 Palestinians have been killed, which, to be clear, is 85 more than the number of Israeli hostages that were taken on October 7th. If we had anything approximating parity of care over the sacredness of every human life, we might expect international outrage about what is happening week by week. But of course, that is not the story of the present moment. Far from it. We're in a world in which the powers that be seem to be insisting on moving us into a further stage of genocide denial, in which we are somehow supposed to forget the last 2 years in favour of the ceasefire. And I think it's worth stopping for a moment to unpack why so many people feel the need to put quotation marks around the word. On the one side, of course, there is the fact that alongside the rising death toll, Israel has violated the ceasefire at least 394 times since it was called, almost every day. More than 1,500 buildings have been destroyed, with entire neighbourhoods decimated. Aid and medical supplies are not entering at the level required. Drones haven't stopped flying, and even the yellow line that marks Israel's total military control has moved in some areas. But as if that wasn't enough, the reason the word chokes in the throat is because this ceasefire is a doubling down on the scale of injustice that preceded the nightmare of this genocide. Normally, when you have a ceasefire between two warring parties, you return to a situation in which the parties at war, previously at peace with each other, return to peace. The word peace, even the word ceasefire, tends to include the idea of sovereignty. But in the case of Palestine, of course, this is not the case. The situation returned to is the continuation of occupation and apartheid, but now in the aftermath of a genocide that is continuing. It is, in short, the next chapter of this ongoing Nakba. And this concept of the ongoing Nakba is something that I think we need everyone in the world to understand with the same depth and humanity that the Holocaust is understood, not because they're in competition, but because at root, this is about the universal struggle for the sanctity of human life that both represent. To bear witness to the Nakba is to understand how the ethnic cleansing of Palestine and the structures of violence necessary for the denial of Palestinian existence and sovereignty have been maintained for over 77 years as part of the story of this genocide. So I will say this here. This coming year, the world over, and as we head towards the 80th anniversary of the Nakba, we need bigger, better organised, evocative events that memorialise and honour the Palestinian experience of these past decades. That is one of our tasks. Because amongst the most awful aspects of this genocide and what has happened to Gaza over the past 2 years is how it echoes what happened to Palestine in 1948, but not just in the acts, in the intergenerational experience of every family. The phenomenon of history repeating itself is about structural conditions remaining constant in timescales that are beyond one lifetime. Let me read a passage from Rashid Khedi's The 100 Years' War on Palestine, on the attack on the PLO in Lebanon, what he calls the most serious attack by a regular army on an Arab capital since World War II, not to be equalled until the US occupation of Baghdad in 2003. On August the 12th, 1982, after epic negotiations, final terms were reached for the PLO's departure. The talks were conducted while Israel carried out the most intense bombardment and ground attacks of the entire siege. The air and artillery assault on that day alone, the this is in 1982, over a month after the PLO had agreed in principle to leave Beirut, caused more than 500 casualties. It was so unrelenting that even Ronald Reagan was moved to demand that Begin halt the carnage. Reagan's diary relates that he called the Israeli Prime Minister during the ferocious offensive, adding, quote, "I was angry. I told him it had to stop or our entire future relationship was endangered. I used the word Holocaust deliberately and said the symbol of his war was becoming a picture of a 7-month-old baby with its arms blown off." During the 10 weeks of fighting, according to Lebanese official statistics, more than 19,000 Palestinians and Lebanese, mostly civilians, were killed. I was born in 1980. The first protest I attended was as a child protesting this 1982 Israeli war on Palestinians. My children have spent their childhood learning what the word genocide means at a distance to the experience of thousands of Palestinian children, but with the intimacy of what it means to be an Arab in this world. The extent of the dehumanization. And again, I want to pause on that word because it seems it's at the heart of the racism that is so pervasive in political culture, able to find ways to justify or ignore complicity in the horrors of what has been done to Palestine and indeed other Arab countries over these past decades. This need to prove that we are equally human and so equally grievable. This need to prove that we are not inherently violent, but rather that the violence in our region is a product of legitimate grievances, the same way as it is for every other human culture. This need to prove that we are not anti-Semitic, or that we are the good ones. This need to prove that our testimony is just as valuable as anyone else's. This fundamental mistrust of Arabs and certainly Palestinians. This world that tells you that you are not safe and not safe to thrive because of where you're from. How do you recover from the fact that after 2 years of a live stream genocide in which you implored the culture around you to see it for what it is, now you're being told, it seems, to forget it even happened and drop the demands for justice and accountability in exchange for this bunny-eared ceasefire that wants to magic away the injustice with even more colonialism, headed by Trump and Tony Blair and passed as a UN resolution while the killing continues? When I'm at my lowest, it is the space of solidarity that brings me back up. The millions around the world and in every walk of life who have stepped out in defiance of all the silencing and vilification with the belief that we can be different. The good news is that our eyes are opening collectively, not just to Palestine, but to how Palestine relates to everything else. The contortions of the law and conscience over these past 2 years have been bewildering and so profoundly corrosive. Around the world, they are eating away at democracies, universities, political parties, international law, the media, global institutions, causing repression and a rise of militarism and surveillance everywhere, in service of what? A genocidal Israel that Jewish people around the world are abandoning while making clear that it does not represent them, their religion or traditions, and certainly not the memory of the Holocaust. In service of profits for a military-industrial complex and international mega-corporations that see the future on Mars rather than this Earth. To change the world, you have to see it for what it is. With the intensity of struggle over these 2 years, there is a way of seeing the last 44 days as a return to normal. and another in which we see it as the beginning of regrouping, reorganizing, and getting ready for the decade ahead. Because surely we have to be the generation to bring true peace, a peace built on justice from the river to the sea, in which every Palestinian and Israeli has equal rights, what a free Palestine means to me. There are things we know about these coming years. We know Trump will be in power for at least the next 3 years. We don't know that at clear start. But we do know that the threat from right-wing extremism is on the rise, and unless we can make our political narratives more compelling than theirs, the near future will be even more brutal. Last time I gave a speech at Counterfire in May, Zohran Mamdani was just beginning to hit the headlines. Now he is the New York mayor-elect. The left has a lot to learn from this campaign and the way he has managed to provide a positive vision for change, grounded in the fight for universal values and care for the most vulnerable that is at the heart of socialism. Who would have thought that New York would be the city to show that you can win elections while holding steadfast to your principles on Palestine? This space of cultural and political renewal is where hope lies. And wherever we look, Palestine is at its centre, creating the reconfigurations and alliances that are truly world-building rather than world-destroying, because support for Palestine means dismantling the structures of oppression that invest in warfare rather than welfare. It means dismantling this world of rising billionaire autocracies that thrive on the power imbalances of inequality and maintain themselves through the logic of overwhelming force or capital, rather than addressing the root causes of political turbulence through universal values of equality and justice. Whether it's for the genocide in Gaza or the genocide in Sudan, whether it's for international law or freedom of speech and assembly, whether it's for the NHS or, dare I say it, the BBC, as we wish it was, a free Palestine means unlocking a better future for everyone. Because like the end of slavery, it means putting an end to a world that profits from one people being seen as less human than another, and how that corrodes our political systems everywhere. We are the generation to do it. The ravages of this genocide in its relationship with past genocides is calling for us to rise to the challenge. Because this ongoing Nakba is what happens when the catastrophic legacies of anti-Semitism and colonialism meet. And the only way to a world that has a chance of putting both to rest is with a free Palestine. In other words, a world in which every human life on earth is treated as having equal value with no exception.